my name is Beck and welcome to a themed reading vlog. I am reading some books that I reacted to earlier this year. So in the first half of the year, I did a video series reacting to booktubers' favourite books, and now I'm actually following through and reading said books that I have reacted to. So for this video, I want to react to some of Emily Fox's favourites and some of Reagan's favourites from Peruse Project. So first up, I'm listening to the audiobook for The Sword of Kaigen, and this has been described as Avatar: The Last Airbender meets science fiction and fantasy, which I am finding very accurate at the moment because it's brilliantly building up all of this world building as well as the two main characters. So Matsuda, I think, is one of them, and then Mitsuki is the other. Mitsuki is the mother and then Matsuda is the son, and they live in this very small fishing village, and they live away from the main drag or the main city quite purposefully because the emperor or the government have set up their small town to kind of be the barrier between countries, and if there is a war, then this town is going to be relied upon to stop it. And so because they're cut off from everybody else and they're cut off from technology, they're a very traditional town. Because they're cut off from everyone, they have been the victims of propaganda this whole time. And so it's about a foreign character coming to visit this town to learn at the school, and then Matsuda realizing that a lot of the things he's been told growing up are not actually true. So he doesn't have kind of the facets to understand his own reality, and it shifts a lot of things underneath him, and it's building up in a very gradual way, which I really like. And a lot of the time I thought, oh, this is going to be a little bit info dumpy, but it's actually surprisingly not. It's doing a really good job of putting in flashbacks that are very well timed and also building up our protagonists. And the other protagonist is Mitsuki, who is the mother of Matsuda, and we see flashbacks from her, but we know that she's got some kind of capability and skill because we see her effectively waterbending and controlling water and ice, but she's also a mother now looking after children. So you're like, how did she end up here? How did she end up in this small town when she's got such a amazing past? And I'm not going to talk about her past because that'll spoil you, but I'm loving this book. At the moment it's probably about a 4 stars and it could get better, so I'm really looking forward to reading more. I'm listening to it on audiobook because I really struggled to get the physical copy. And then one of Reagan's favourites that I'm currently reading is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I've been putting this off because I've been intimidated and then I was like, you know what, I've just got to start it and bite the bullet, and I'm so glad I did because the first 10 pages basically punched me in the face in a good way. I don't know how that's possible, but this really hooked me, and I'm now 50 pages in, and there are 3 characters so far, and I'll talk about them properly later because I'm running out of battery. But I just wanted to say that if you're hesitating about starting this book, it is fast-paced, and even though it has a bunch of different characters starting out the plot, I didn't struggle at all. It does the shifts really well, it does the descriptions really well, and it sets up a lot of the localities as well as the characters' understandings of where they specifically are in the world, and it's already planted seeds about which characters are going to cross over. So I'm really looking forward to all of that coming to a head. So I'm really looking forward to reading more of this as well. So a reading vlog where I've actually started 2 books that I am very unlikely to DNF, which is an excellent sign. So I will update you as I read more. Now that I've read a little bit more, I figured I'd come and update this vlog. So I am over a quarter of the way through Sword of Kaigen, and I'm loving it. I'm only loving it as a 4 star, not quite a 5. Some of the phrasing of the Japanese pronunciation by the audiobook narrator is really frustrating me, and some of the scenarios in here, as in like the interpersonal relationships and interactions, feel very stylized to a sense of, oh, I'd expect to see that copy and pasted straight from an anime. So it's kind of like it's used as shorthand in order to get the reader to understand. So that's a little bit frustrating. While I don't actively dislike it, it's just something that I notice and it takes me out of the story. But apart from that, I'm really loving Mitsuki, who is the mum. I really adore how she's trying to be a good person in terms of living in Kaigen, and how she's got to adhere to the values of being a woman, which is not a fighter, it's just a caregiver, and to keep your head down. From her past, based on how she's reacting now, I'm loving her character development, and her dedication and her relationship to her children is incredible, and I really love her discussions with her son, who is the other perspective. I really like the respect that is garnered between both of them, and I really enjoy the way their relationship is being built. I think it's beautiful, and I don't often read about mothers like her in a book. So it's really refreshing to read about that too. And then I've also been reading Black Sun, which is here. I haven't got the cover on it because I'm reading it, obviously. I'm 76 pages in. And if somebody told me this was a book that had a magical cult in it, I probably would have picked it up a lot sooner. This has a few different perspective characters, which surprised me. I've been introduced to 3 of them, and I think that's all of them so far. But all of the names I'm probably going to pronounce wrong, so I do apologize in advance. We've got Serapio, who is a 13-year-old boy, and it opens on his chapter, and I don't want to talk about him too much because the opening 10 pages with him featuring are just jaw-dropping. So it's a cult. That's all you need to know. Read this. If the first 10 pages don't hook you, then I don't know what to say. We've also got another character called Ziala, who is a captain, and she's arrested drunk, and that's the first time you see her, like getting broken out of a cell. So I really enjoy her beginnings, and she seems to have magic. So her race is called a teak, and it seems like she can connect to the magic of the ocean or of water at least. So some kind of elemental spiritual power is going on there, but it hasn't been described properly yet. And now the other character, she is like a priest, and her name is Naranpa. It's like a priest or witch, and she is a head of a faction. She's come from her small family, and they've essentially donated her or given her away to this kind of priesthood, and now she's risen in their ranks. Her family have passed away because of poverty, and she's got to manage the different political movements and potential rebellion because there has just been uproar about a cult occurring in the town that she's, or in the city that she's in. So there is the sun, then there is the pirate kind of captain, and then there's this priest. And I imagine that the sun and the pirate captain are gonna come together and then go to the city. That's my projection. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of these characters collide, because even though it's written in a third person way, I am finding a way to relate to all of the characters in here as if they're very distinctly stylized, which I really enjoy. So I think when I actually can make time to sit down and read, I'm going to fly through this in the chunks that I pick it up in. But because I've just not made time to read as part of my day because I've been too exhausted, it hasn't really been happening. So my aim is to try and get through this as quick as possible, because magical cult, multiple perspective, queer positive fantasy, why haven't I read this yet? And also Sword of Kaigen is pretty great, and I'm really enjoying both of them, so solid picks. Hi, it has taken me a while, but I have finally finished the 2 books that I started this vlog with. So it's going to be a bit polarizing because I thought these books would end with ratings quite close together, but actually one of them was really good and one of them I didn't end up loving. So I'm going to talk about Black Sun first. And because she's the priestess of this religious clan, she's kind of trying to put forward a new way of doing things, but the ones who are part of that cult are deeply against that. And so there's a lot of sticking points in this story with different characters and their beliefs, and I like all of that description, and the world building in here felt really lush. And then after about 100 or 150 pages or so, there's the introduction of another character, and he's like a warrior prince. So based on all of those characters and the stereotypes I'm used to reading about in fantasy, I said this in my beginning clips, but I could kind of see where these characters were going. But that didn't bother me so much because I loved the world building and the magic use in here and the way these characters reacted with each other. I think it was all really well pulled off, and I ended up loving this. I gave it 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5 because the fast-pacedness lost me a little in certain perspective characters. I think that's the danger with having a bunch of different perspectives. You're always going to naturally love one character more than the others, and for me the pirate ship quest was the one that really took my interest. So I love the character relationships and the intricacies and the backstories, and I can't wait to see that continued in the sequel because I know the sequel is out. So as far as this goes, my reading is pretty on par with Reagan because I think this was one of her favorites. So we've got 1 for Reagan, but unfortunately I ended up also finishing the Sword of Kaigen, and I literally finished it an hour ago. So my update is pretty fresh, but I'm quite frustrated because this initially started as a book that I was loving, and then it had huge changes to it in the last quarter where there was a massive tonal shift, and a core thematic shift, and I did not like it. For some people, it's probably a very big plot twisty thing, but for me, I was like, why are you doing this? This is so unnecessary. And I do want to talk about spoilers for a second, so I'll put this spoilers tag up, and once that's finished with, I'll remove the tag so you can keep watching. But if you don't care about being spoiled, then naturally I'm just going to keep talking about it. So the tonal shift in here, it starts out with the book opening on two main characters, and they are a mother and son. And then there is a war in this town, and naturally you are suspecting this war is going to occur because it's kind of the premise of this whole culture. That is what they're there for. Their purpose is to protect and fight. And so this war happens, the son gets killed in the line of duty, and then it follows the mum, who I got the name wrong of when I opened this vlog. And the story follows her and her husband, who you are set up to think of as the villain, because she has 4 children, and this husband has essentially raped her for every child that she has born. And she's also had 2 miscarriages, and just after one of her miscarriages, it is shown he's very dismissive and cold to her and not loving at all. And later on it excuses that by saying that with his magical elemental ability, he's started to mentally fuse with the mountain and put all of his pain aside, so he was becoming not human. And she forces a change in his persona, basically forces him to be human again after this really epic battle. And then after that, he just kind of becomes more feeling and more human. And while that is interesting to explore, I hated that it was redeeming, because he's a horrible character. How could you do that to someone, not apologize for it, and then have the wife turn around later and declare that she loves him? That was all messed up for me, and I didn't like it at all. It was like it did away with the beginning of the story and everything that it set up, and then it went down this... Anyway, I didn't like it at all. So now, after the spoilers have ended, I want to basically say that I started this story out with a 4-star rating, and because of that last quarter, it went down to 2 stars. On Goodreads, I've given it a 3, but because of the tonal shift and how I felt betrayed by it, and how it set up a lot about different characters and had a redeeming arc that I wholeheartedly disagree with, I just didn't like it. So unfortunately, that should probably have been my biggest disappointment in my mid-year book freakout tag for this year, but it just happened after I'd filmed that tag. So I would say this is a massive disappointment for me. If it had just kept with the first 3 quarters, it would have been a new favourite, but the ending just betrayed the entire thing. And I was saying to a friend a couple of times, I was like, why am I still reading this? I could have just stopped. I've got 4 hours of the audiobook left. Why am I still here? But because I'd gotten so far into it, I felt like I was doing myself a disservice to commit all this time and then not finish the audiobook. So I have finished it, and I can definitively say that I'm giving it a 2 stars. Giving it a 2 means I'm going against all of the enjoyment I had for the first 3 quarters, but I feel so betrayed that I'm going with the petty rating of 2 stars. So I wish I loved this, and usually mine and Emily Fox's tastes are quite crossover, but in this instance, this is like a stark nope. Which is unfortunate, because I wanted to love this story. It had such cool stuff about it, like the elemental sword fighting. It was very reminiscent of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it was just not what I wanted. So that's quite unfortunate. Hi, do you want to know something embarrassing? I have been talking about Black Sun this whole time, and I thought that it was a favourite of Emily Fox's, but I've gone back and looked at my lists, and this is actually a favourite of Elliot from Elliot Brooks. She mentioned this at the very end of her video, and everything else in her video I had already either read or just DNF'd, and so I was like, oh, I hope this is a saving grace, and sure enough it was, because I loved this and gave it 4.5 stars. So Elliot's book featured in this vlog, as well as Reagan's and Emily's picks, so I feel really bad now, so oops. But that aside, I also read one of Emily's other picks today, and that is the audiobook for Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin, and this is a very, very short audiobook. I got it done in a lunch break, but it's about an hour long, and it follows a character who is an alien coming to Earth hundreds of years after Earth has deteriorated, but there's still civilizations on it, and so it's this disparity between what is expected and then what is actually existing, and how beautiful the culture now is that has grown from that because all of the oppressors left, and then how that addresses selfishness and the self and identity and characters, and oh, it's really good. I was actually quite surprised that I enjoyed it, because it was quite stark and very uniquely told, because it's addressed to the reader, because there's an AI in the main character's head, and this AI is oddly enough narrated by Jason Isaacs, which was again another big game changer for me. I was like, why do I recognize this audiobook narrator's voice? But anyway, this narration was quite intense on purpose, and it addresses the reader. So it's like, you did this and you did that. And N.K. Jemisin did this in the Broken Earth trilogy, with one of the perspectives being in second person. So she's written like this before and she's pulled it off, and she did it again in here. She really pulled it off. Initially I was a little bit confused, and it felt like there was space for the actual character's voice rather than just the AI in their head. But I got past that pretty quickly, and I ended up really quite enjoying this, and I think I actually gave it 4 stars. I was going to give it like 3.5, but I ended up rounding it up to 4 just because of the themes. I quite enjoyed it. So that is another pick by Emily that I quite liked. So now that we're kind of halfway through this vlog, I guess I wanted to talk about the rest of the picks for this. So I've already talked about Elliot and Emily, but I wanted to finish off Reagan's picks for this video. So the books that I want to continue on this vlog with are Senlin Ascends, which is the first in a fantasy quartet. And I think it's got a character who goes to somewhere where his wife gets kidnapped or murdered, and he's got to find her. And each level of the tower in this world has a different political, not faction, but different like society, I suppose. So he's going up the societies trying to find his wife, I guess. And so I'm interested in trying it, but I feel like it's going to feature the trope that I hate, which is the woman in the fridge trope, which is when the woman is either kidnapped or murdered to further the male protagonist's storyline. So it really depends on how this book goes, because not that I like that trope, but I have liked stories after that trope. I don't want to say which ones because obviously it'll spoil, but sometimes that trope can be done well even though I don't like it, so we'll see. And then I also have the Third Expanse book that I want to try because this was already on my TBR, and so why not give it a crack? Also, it will make me read it, and I've been putting it off for a while because it's long. So let's hope that I can finish this and then Senlin Ascends with not too much time left over at the end, because these vlogs really take it out of me even though they're worthwhile. So it has been a little bit of time since I have touched this vlog. Hello! I would like to report that I have made some headway on the last 2 titles that I said that I would get to for this reading vlog. The first one is Abaddon's Gate by James S.A. Corey, and that's the Third Expanse book that was one of Reagan's favourites, I think. And I tried reading this. I got just over 200 pages into it, and I ended up putting it down. And one of the main reasons that I put it down is one of the newly introduced perspective characters, because you get introduced to different additional characters every book, even though you've got Jim Holden and the crew with him. They're like the staple, and then you get everyone introduced around them that add their own facets to the politics. And so when there were more characters added to this particular book, one of them kept doing things that seemed very out of character. That character would actually murder people, and at the same time they would tell themselves that they don't want to be doing it, but they are the one who is in charge of their own actions. So it didn't feel like the two internal voices and the physical body were really marrying up. So it didn't feel, it was very alienating, I think is what I'm trying to say, which I feel is ironic for a sci-fi book to describe it as alienating, but I digress. I ended up putting that book down, and that is kind of unfortunate, but I realized as well that not only was that perspective character throwing me off, the books are just very long and very word heavy, and that really affected the pace for me. And so when I was reading it, I was putting off other books that I was enjoying more, where I connected to the characters more. And while I connected to the characters in the first and somewhat to the second book in this series, I felt kind of non-attached to them in the third book, and I've happily unhauled that book now, and I feel much lighter for it. As soon as I decided to put it down, I felt a lot more free. And I also want to say that I started the last book of Reagan's favourites, and that is Senlin Ascends. And Senlin Ascends starts out the way that I thought, except thankfully the wife does not get murdered. I'm 20 pages into this book, and Senlin feels like that particularly pretentious character that thinks he knows everything, and he has or will probably have a lot of experiences that are very humbling for him, where he realizes, actually, I don't know what I thought I knew. And I think while that could create a brilliant story, I'm just zero interest over here. So I'm going to put this down at 20 pages because Senlin just bores the heck out of me. And the wife, who is named Maria, is described as being a dozen years younger than him, and he's in his mid-30s, and that rubbed me the wrong way. But then I kept reading, and in the next page he's complimenting all of the things that she is as a person. So I'm like, which way is the writer positioning me to feel, and has his writing voice or has his writing style eclipsed the tone of the story? Either way, it just felt not right, and I think this is a debut, but I was talking to a friend at work about this, and the way we were describing it and the way we were talking about it, and he flipped through the first few pages as well, I was like, you have helped me realize that I don't care for this book. So in terms of the favorites in this vlog, I thought I loved sort of Kaigen and I didn't, so bah. And then I loved Black Sun and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. So that is actually Elliot Brooks's favorite. I think that was at the end of her video. I think it has crossover with Reagan potentially as well, but then the rest of Reagan's books I don't really have much success. So Senlin, obviously I DNF'd. The Leviathan Expanse book I obviously DNF'd as well. And then there was also Emergency Skin, which was an Emily Fox pick. So as far as my reading taste goes for these booktubers, mostly they align, I think, with Emily, although obviously there are some outliers because I think this was on her list as well as Reagan's. So it must have just hit a good spot for both of them, but I just don't like it. So maybe they read more historical stuff than me, or more wordy and political stuff than me, and therefore it doesn't fall in my category of interest. So that would probably fall with the Expanse series as well, because that is getting very political. And while I love politics to an extent, I do prefer characters and world building. So while this was starting to be intriguing with different pieces of world building and stuff with the whole Tower of Babel, I just don't care for it because Senlin is boring. So with all of that said, that is the conclusion to this vlog, and it is also the reason that I put off wrapping up this vlog for so long, because I've put reading this one off for like months. So I was like, I need to just get to it so that I can conclude this vlog, because I was watching it back and I loved all of my thoughts about Sword of Kaigen, and you could really see how I flipped and how disappointed I was when you were watching. So let me know if there's a book that you think is popular that you just didn't like either. I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments. Leave me some blue heart emojis if you're here and you stayed this long, but thank you again. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.